The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the velvet ropes, cameras ready to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood a young man who looked remarkably ordinary despite his extraordinary background. Marcus Wellington, 23 years old, wore simple jeans and a navy hoodie, his dark hair slightly messy from the London wind. What the tourists didn't know was that Marcus was the son of Sir Richard Wellington, one of Britain's most celebrated actors and recent recipient of knighthood. Marcus had grown up in the spotlight, though his parents had tried their best to give him a normal childhood. His father's fame meant that paparazzi were always lurking, waiting for any story they could spin. Recently, the pressure had become unbearable. Every magazine seemed to carry stories about Sir Richard's troubled son or the Wellington family's dark secrets. Most of these stories were completely false, but they hurt nonetheless. Marcus felt like he was drowning in expectations and judgments from people who didn't even know him. The idea for the prank had come to him 3 days earlier while scrolling through social media. He'd seen countless videos of people pulling harmless pranks, gaining millions of views, and becoming internet celebrities overnight. Maybe, he thought, if he could create something that showed his fun side, people would stop seeing him as just another privileged celebrity kid with problems. The plan seemed simple enough. Approach one of the royal guards during their ceremony and playfully snatch their iconic bearskin hat. It would be funny, harmless, and surely get people talking about something positive for once. What Marcus didn't fully consider was the serious nature of royal protocol and security. The guards weren't just ceremonial figures. They were active soldiers with real responsibilities. The bearskin hats weren't costumes, but official military headgear with deep historical significance. Each hat was worth thousands of pounds and represented centuries of British military tradition. The guards wore them with pride, and any interference with their uniform was considered a serious breach of protocol. As Marcus positioned himself closer to the ceremony area, he noticed the intense focus of the guards. Their red tunics were perfectly pressed, their black boots gleamed in the sunlight, and their faces remained completely expressionless despite the chaos of tourists around them. Guard Captain James Morrison, a veteran of 15 years, stood particularly tall among his men. He had served in Afghanistan and Iraq before being selected for this prestigious posting. For him, this wasn't just a job for tourists. It was a sacred duty passed down through generations of British soldiers. The crowd pressed closer as the ceremony began. Marcus felt his heart rate increase. He had always been impulsive, a trait that had gotten him into trouble before. In school, he was the kid who would interrupt classes with jokes or pull pranks on teachers. His parents had enrolled him in several different schools, hoping to find one that could handle his energy. But Marcus wasn't malicious. He was just a young man trying to find his place in a world that seemed to have already decided who he should be. Standing nearby was Rebecca Chun, a tourist from Hong Kong who had saved for 2 years to afford this trip to London. She was recording everything on her phone, excited to share the experience with her family back home. Rebecca had no idea she was about to witness something that would change several lives forever. Her innocent recording would become crucial evidence in the events that followed. Also in the crowd was Detective Inspector Sarah Matthews from the Metropolitan Police. She wasn't on duty, but had brought her 8-year-old nephew to see the ceremony. Sarah had worked security for royal events before and knew how seriously any disruption was taken. She watched the crowd with the trained eye of someone who had spent 15 years in law enforcement, automatically noting exits, potential troublemakers, and security personnel positions. As the guards began their precise movements, Marcus took a deep breath. In his mind, he rehearsed exactly what he would do. He would dart forward quickly, grab the hat playfully, maybe wave it around for a few seconds, then hand it back with a big smile. The guards would probably smile too once they realized it was just harmless fun. The crowd would laugh, someone would post the video online, and, finally, people would see Marcus as funny and likable rather than troubled. The reality of royal security, however, was far more complex than Marcus imagined. Hidden throughout the crowd were plainclothes security officers, each trained to respond instantly to any threat. Advanced surveillance systems monitored every movement, and protocols existed for dealing with any interference with the ceremony. What seemed like a simple tourist attraction was actually one of the most secure locations in London. Guard Morrison had noticed Marcus earlier. Something about the young man's nervous energy and the way he kept moving closer to the ceremony area had caught his attention. Years of military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and something felt off. He made a subtle hand signal to his colleague, Guard Sergeant Williams, indicating they should both keep an eye on the fidgety tourist in the hoodie. The ceremony continued with its usual precision. The guards' movements were perfectly synchronized, each step rehearsed thousands of times. The crowd watched in respectful silence, most understanding that this was a serious military tradition, not entertainment. Children pointed excitedly at the tall hats and bright uniforms, while adults took careful photos and spoke in hushed voices. Marcus felt sweat forming on his palms despite the cool morning air. Second thoughts began creeping into his mind, but he pushed them away. He had committed to this plan, and backing down now would just confirm what everyone already thought about him, that he was weak and indecisive. His father had always taught him to be confident and take chances. Fortune favors the bold, Sir Richard would often say during his motivational speeches to drama students. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that his father's own career had been built on taking calculated risks. Sir Richard had started as a struggling theater actor, taking on challenging roles that other actors wouldn't touch. His breakthrough had come from a controversial performance that many critics initially hated but which eventually earned him recognition as one of Britain's finest actors. Marcus wanted that same kind of breakthrough moment, though he was about to learn that not all risks lead to positive outcomes. As the ceremony reached its midpoint, Marcus noticed that one of the guards was standing slightly apart from the others, making him an easier target. This was Guard Morrison, who was actually positioned there strategically to observe the crowd. Marcus interpreted the positioning as an opportunity, not realizing he was about to approach the most experienced and alert guard in the entire unit. The moments before Marcus made his move seemed to slow down in his memory afterward. He could hear his own heartbeat over the sound of the crowd. The morning air felt crisp against his face. The smell of London, a mixture of history, car exhaust, and fresh rain, filled his nostrils. Somewhere in the distance, Big Ben chimed, marking another quarter hour in the long history of this great city. Rebecca Chun adjusted her phone to get a better angle of the guards. Her finger was ready on the record button, wanting to capture the perfect moment of British pageantry to show her friends. Detective Inspector Matthews was explaining to her nephew about the different regiments and their history. Neither woman had any idea they were about to witness something that would be replayed millions of times across the globe. Marcus took his first step forward, crossing an invisible line that separated spectators from participants. In that moment, several things happened simultaneously. Guard Morrison's trained eyes immediately locked onto the movement. Plainclothes security officers began to shift position. Advanced monitoring systems flagged the unusual behavior. What Marcus thought was the beginning of a harmless prank was actually the start of a serious security incident. The distance between Marcus and Guard Morrison was only about 15 feet, but it might as well have been a mile considering the cultural and social divide it represented. On one side stood a young man seeking attention and validation, driven by impulses he didn't fully understand. On the other side stood a professional soldier, bound by duty, tradition, and years of training that had prepared him for exactly this type of situation. As Marcus took his second step, Guard Morrison's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his radio. The movement was so slight that tourists wouldn't notice, but trained security personnel throughout the area immediately understood the signal. The atmosphere began to shift from ceremonial calm to heightened alertness, though most of the crowd remained blissfully unaware that anything was changing. Marcus felt a strange mixture of excitement and terror. Part of him wanted to turn back, to blend into the crowd, and pretend this had never been his plan. But another part of him, the part that had been shaped by years of living in his father's shadow and dealing with constant public scrutiny, pushed him forward. This was his moment to do something that would finally get people's attention for the right reasons. The final step Marcus took before making his move brought him to within arm's reach of Guard Morrison. The guard's presence was imposing up close. He stood at least 6 feet 4 inches tall, his uniform impeccable, his bearing suggesting years of military discipline. For just a moment, Marcus hesitated. The reality of what he was about to do suddenly seemed much more serious than it had in his imagination. But it was too late to turn back. Marcus had committed himself to this course of action, and dozens of people were now watching his every move, even if they didn't yet understand what they were seeing. In the next few seconds, a simple prank would transform into an international incident that would change multiple lives forever. Marcus lunged forward with surprising speed, his hand reaching for the magnificent bearskin hat that sat proudly atop Guard Morrison's head. The hat was heavier than he expected, made from the fur of Canadian black bears, and standing nearly 18 inches tall. As his fingers closed around it, Marcus felt the weight of history. These hats had been worn by British soldiers for over 2 centuries, through wars, ceremonies, and countless changing of the guard rituals. The moment Marcus's hand touched the hat, several things happened at once. Guard Morrison, despite his training to remain motionless during ceremonies, reacted with lightning-fast reflexes honed by years of military service. His left hand shot up to grab Marcus's wrist, while his right hand immediately went to his radio. The movement was so swift and precise that it looked almost choreographed, though it was pure instinct born from thousands of hours of training. The crowd gasped collectively as they realized what was happening. Rebecca Chen's phone captured every second as the young man in the hoodie struggled briefly with the towering guard. Children pointed excitedly while their parents pulled them back, suddenly, aware that this wasn't part of the official ceremony. The atmosphere shifted from peaceful observation to electric tension in a matter of heartbeats. Security breach at position 7. Guard Morrison spoke calmly into his radio, his voice betraying none of the adrenaline that was surely coursing through his veins. Despite the ongoing struggle with Marcus, his military training kept him completely composed. He had dealt with far more dangerous situations in combat zones, and, while this was unexpected, it wasn't particularly threatening. Marcus found himself caught in an iron grip that he couldn't break free from. Guard Morrison's hand was like a vice around his wrist, making it impossible to complete his planned hat snatching. Panic began to set in as Marcus realized this wasn't going according to plan at all. The guard wasn't smiling or playing along. His face remained stern and professional, treating this as a serious security incident rather than a harmless prank. "Let go. It's just a joke," Marcus shouted, but his words were lost in the commotion that was beginning to erupt around them. More guards were already moving into position, their synchronized movement demonstrating the efficiency of their training. What had started as a simple ceremony was rapidly becoming a coordinated security response. Detective Inspector Sarah Matthews immediately recognized the situation for what it was, a potential security threat that needed to be contained quickly. Her off-duty status didn't matter. Years of police work had programmed her to respond to situations like this automatically. She handed her nephew to another family member and began moving through the crowd, identifying herself to other security personnel and trying to establish a perimeter around the incident. The plainclothes security officers who had been monitoring the crowd sprang into action with practiced efficiency. Within 30 seconds of Marcus making his move, 6 additional security personnel had surrounded the area. They moved like a well-oiled machine, their casual tourist disguises dropping away to reveal the serious professionals underneath. Radio chatter filled the air as they coordinated their response and called for backup. Marcus was beginning to understand the gravity of his mistake. What he had imagined as a playful prank was being treated as an assault on one of Britain's most sacred traditions. The bearskin hat, which he had seen merely as a prop for his joke, represented something much more significant to these men and women in uniform. It was a symbol of their service, their history, and their dedication to duty. Guard Morrison maintained his grip on Marcus while speaking rapidly into his radio. Suspect is a young male, approximately 23 years old, wearing blue jeans and a navy hoodie. No weapons visible. Appears to be acting alone. Request immediate response team to position 7. His voice remained steady and professional despite the unusual nature of the situation. The ceremony had completely stopped now, with the other guards maintaining their positions but ready to respond if needed. Their training had prepared them for various scenarios, though tourist tries to steal ceremonial hat wasn't something they encountered regularly. Still, they adapted quickly, treating this as they would any other security breach. Rebecca Chin found herself with what would soon become the most valuable video footage in London. Her phone had captured the entire incident from the moment Marcus approached the guard to his current predicament. She continued recording, though her hands were shaking with excitement and nervousness. She had no idea that her video would soon be broadcast around the world and make her briefly famous in her own right. The crowd was growing larger as word spread that something unusual was happening. Tourists who had been visiting other parts of the palace complex began gathering, all trying to get a look at the commotion. Social media was already buzzing as people posted quick updates and blurry photos, though Rebecca's video would prove to be the clearest documentation of the incident. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to figure out how to explain himself. He couldn't exactly say, "I'm the son of Sir Richard Wellington, and I was just trying to improve my public image with a harmless prank." That would sound either completely unbelievable or like he was trying to use his father's fame to get out of trouble. Both options seemed equally bad at this point. "My name is Marcus Wellington," he finally said, hoping that might somehow help his situation. "This is all just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean any harm." But Guard Morrison's expression didn't change, and his grip remained firm. To a professional soldier, intentions mattered less than actions, and the action of attempting to remove a guard's ceremonial headgear was serious regardless of motivation. Detective Inspector Matthews had reached the inner circle of the incident and was coordinating with the Royal Security team. She could see that the young man didn't appear to be a genuine threat. His body language suggested panic and regret rather than malicious intent. But protocol was protocol, and any interference with royal ceremonies had to be taken seriously. "Sir, I need you to remain calm and cooperate fully," she said to Marcus, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to taking control of chaotic situations. "You're going to be detained while we sort this out. The best thing you can do right now is comply with instructions, and we'll get this resolved as quickly as possible." Marcus nodded frantically, finally, beginning to understand the seriousness of what he had done. This wasn't going to be resolved with apologies and explanations. He was going to be arrested, photographed, and probably charged with something that would become public record. His father would find out, the media would have a field day, and his reputation, which he had been trying to improve, would be damaged beyond repair. The response team arrived within minutes, their presence making the situation feel even more serious. These weren't regular police officers, but specialized security personnel trained specifically for royal protection duties. They moved with military precision, establishing a secure perimeter and beginning the process of removing Marcus from the scene without disrupting the other tourists too much. Guard Morrison finally released Marcus's wrist, transferring custody to the security team with practiced efficiency. His ceremonial hat remained firmly on his head. Marcus's attempt to remove it had failed completely, though not for lack of trying. The guard straightened his uniform with quick, precise movements and prepared to resume his duties as if nothing had happened. "Wellington," one of the security officers repeated Marcus's name as he checked it against a mental database of known individuals. The name sounded familiar, though he couldn't immediately place it. "Are you related to Sir Richard Wellington, the actor?" The question was asked casually, but Marcus's face went pale as he realized his worst fears were coming true. "He's my father," Marcus admitted quietly, knowing there was no point in lying. Within hours, this fact would be public knowledge anyway. The security officer's expression changed slightly, not necessarily becoming more sympathetic, but indicating that this case was now more complex than a simple tourist prank gone wrong. The crowd was still growing, and several professional photographers had appeared seemingly from nowhere. The modern era of smartphones meant that multiple angles of the incident were being recorded, and Marcus could already imagine the headlines that would dominate tomorrow's newspapers. "Sir Richard's son attacks Royal Guard," or "Wellington family scandal at Buckingham Palace." The possibilities were endless and all equally devastating. As he was led away from the scene, Marcus caught sight of Rebecca Chen's phone still recording. He wanted to say something, to explain that this wasn't what it looked like, but the security officers kept him moving. The bearskin hat that had seemed like such an innocent target for his prank now represented everything that had gone wrong with his impulsive decision. The ceremony gradually resumed as the immediate threat was removed, though the guards remained more alert than usual. Guard Morrison adjusted his position slightly, but showed no other sign that anything unusual had occurred. His professionalism in handling the situation would later be commended by his superiors, though he would also face questions about how a tourist had managed to get close enough to attempt such an action. Detective Inspector Matthews coordinated with the Royal Security team to ensure that proper procedures were followed. As an experienced police officer, she understood the importance of handling high-profile incidents correctly. Any mistakes in procedure could become ammunition for defense lawyers later, and the involvement of Sir Richard Wellington's son made this case particularly sensitive. The processing of Marcus at the nearby police station would be thorough and by the book. His fingerprints would be taken, photographs from multiple angles, and a detailed statement recorded. The charges would likely include assault on a police officer. The guards technically held police powers, interfering with official duties, and possibly disturbing the peace. Each charge carried potential fines and even jail time. Marcus's one phone call would go to his father, a conversation that he was dreading more than any potential legal consequences. Sir Richard had worked his entire career to build a reputation based on professionalism, dignity, and respect for British institutions. His son's actions represented everything the actor stood against, and the disappointment in his father's voice would be harder to bear than any punishment the legal system might impose. The incident was already spreading across social media platforms faster than anyone could have anticipated. Rebecca Chin's video was being shared thousands of times, with new copies appearing faster than original posts could be taken down. The hashtag Buckingham prank was trending within hours, and news organizations around the world were beginning to pick up the story. As the immediate crisis was resolved and normal ceremony operations resumed, the real consequences of Marcus's impulsive decision were just beginning to unfold. The news broke faster than anyone could have anticipated. Rebecca Chin's video had been uploaded to several social media platforms within minutes of the incident, and, by noon, major news outlets across Britain were running the story as breaking news. Sir Richard Wellington's son arrested in Royal Guard hat incident blazed across television screens and newspaper websites throughout the United Kingdom and beyond. At his elegant London home in Hampstead, Sir Richard Wellington was in his study rehearsing lines for an upcoming BBC production when his phone rang. The caller ID showed it was his publicist, Margaret Thornby, who had managed his career for over 15 years. Margaret's voice was tense as she delivered the news that would change everything for the Wellington family. "Richard, you need to sit down," Margaret began, her usual calm demeanor cracked with stress. "Marcus has been arrested at Buckingham Palace. The footage is everywhere online. He tried to take a guard's hat during the ceremony, and it's being treated as a serious security breach. The media is going absolutely mad with this story." Sir Richard felt the world tilt around him as he processed the information. His son, who had struggled with being in the public eye his entire life, had just created the biggest scandal of his young life in the most public way imaginable. The actor's first instinct was to protect his child, but he also understood immediately that this incident would have far-reaching consequences for both their careers and reputations. "Where is he now?" Sir Richard asked, already reaching for his car keys. His voice remained steady, a skill developed through decades of performing under pressure. But inside he was experiencing a mixture of fear, disappointment, and fierce paternal protectiveness that threatened to overwhelm him. Margaret provided the details she had gathered from her contacts in the media and police circles. Marcus was being held at Belgravia police station, the charges were still being determined, and the video evidence was crystal clear about what had happened. More troubling was the fact that this wasn't being treated as a simple prank. Royal security protocols meant that any interference with ceremonial duties could result in serious charges. Meanwhile, at the police station, Marcus sat in an interview room staring at his hands and wondering how everything had gone so terribly wrong. The room was small and sterile, with fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh and unwelcoming. Detective Constable James Patterson sat across from him, preparing for what would be one of the more unusual interviews of his career. Detective Patterson was a 20-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police who had seen everything from petty theft to serious violent crimes. However, interviewing the son of one of Britain's most beloved actors for attempting to steal a Royal Guard's hat was definitely a first. He approached the situation with professional detachment, knowing that the high-profile nature of the case meant every detail would be scrutinized. "Let's start from the beginning," Detective Patterson said, activating the recording equipment. "Can you tell me in your own words what happened this morning at Buckingham Palace?" His voice was neutral and professional, giving no indication of whether he sympathized with Marcus or viewed him as just another troublemaker. Marcus took a deep breath and began to explain his thought process, though saying it out loud made his reasoning sound even more foolish than it had seemed at the time. He talked about the pressure of living in his father's shadow, the constant media attention, and his desperate desire to do something that would make people see him in a positive light for once. "I never meant to cause a security incident," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to do something fun that would go viral and show people I'm not the troubled celebrity kid they think I am. I know it sounds stupid now, but I really thought it would just be harmless fun that everyone would laugh about." Detective Patterson listened without interruption, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. He could see that Marcus was genuinely remorseful, but the law didn't make exceptions for good intentions. The young man had interfered with official duties, potentially endangered security, and caused a significant disruption to one of Britain's most important ceremonial events. Back at Buckingham Palace, the incident had triggered a comprehensive security review. Commander Patricia Williams, head of Royal Protection Services, was conducting a detailed analysis of how a civilian had managed to get close enough to a guard to attempt removing his ceremonial headgear. While no actual security breach had occurred, the incident highlighted potential vulnerabilities in crowd control procedures. The review would examine everything from the positioning of plainclothes officers to the effectiveness of crowd barriers. Commander Williams had served in royal protection for over a decade and understood that even seemingly minor incidents like this one could reveal important security gaps that needed to be addressed before a more serious threat emerged. Guard Captain Morrison, who had handled the immediate situation with textbook professionalism, found himself at the center of the investigation. His superiors praised his quick reactions and proper protocol adherence, but they also wanted to understand exactly how the incident had unfolded. Every second of his interaction with Marcus would be analyzed to improve future responses. The suspect moved faster than anticipated, Morrison explained during his debriefing. He had been displaying nervous behavior for several minutes before making his move, but his actual approach was more aggressive than his demeanor suggested. The grip strength required to remove a bearskin hat is considerable, and he was more determined than his appearance indicated. The media response was growing more intense by the hour. Television news programs were running continuous coverage, with royal correspondents and celebrity journalists providing commentary on everything from Marcus's psychological state to the broader implications for the monarchy's public image. The story had everything that made for compelling news: celebrity scandal, royal tradition, and dramatic footage. Sir Richard Wellington's legal team was already working to minimize the potential damage to both Marcus and the family reputation. Leading the effort was Eleanor Blackwood, one of London's most respected criminal defense barristers, who specialized in high-profile cases involving public figures. She understood that this case would be tried as much in the court of public opinion as in an actual courtroom. The key is demonstrating that this was an impulsive mistake by a young man under pressure, not a calculated attack on British institutions, Eleanor explained to Sir Richard during their emergency meeting. Marcus's character references will be crucial, as will evidence of his genuine remorse and the harmless nature of his intentions. The strategy would involve portraying Marcus as a sympathetic figure who had made a serious error in judgment rather than a privileged young man who thought he was above the law. Eleanor's experience with celebrity cases had taught her that public perception could significantly influence legal outcomes, especially in cases involving beloved public figures like Sir Richard. Rebecca Chen found herself thrust into an unexpected spotlight as news organizations around the world sought to license her footage of the incident. Major networks were offering substantial sums for exclusive rights to the video that had captured Marcus's failed prank attempt. For a young woman who had been saving money for years just to afford her London vacation, the sudden financial windfall was overwhelming. However, Rebecca was also struggling with the ethical implications of profiting from someone else's misfortune. She had researched Marcus Wellington online and discovered that despite his privileged background, he seemed to be a genuinely troubled young man rather than a malicious troublemaker. The decision of whether to sell her footage would weigh heavily on her conscience. The international media attention was bringing scrutiny not just to Marcus, but to the entire Wellington family. Tabloid journalists were digging into every aspect of their lives, looking for any detail that might add context or controversy to the story. Sir Richard's charitable work, his past relationships, and even his early career struggles were all being examined under a microscope. For Marcus, sitting in his cell awaiting his father's arrival, the wait seemed endless. He had plenty of time to reflect on how a moment's impulse had triggered such massive consequences. The silence of the cell was broken only by occasional footsteps in the corridor and the distant sound of phones ringing as the media frenzy continued to build. Detective Patterson completed his initial interview and began preparing his report for the Crown Prosecution Service. The evidence was clear-cut. Multiple videos showed Marcus attempting to remove Guard Morrison's hat, and his own confession left no doubt about his intentions. However, the detective also recognized that the case involved complex factors that would require careful consideration. The charges being considered included assault on a police officer, since Royal Guards held certain police powers during their duties. There was also the possibility of charges related to interfering with official ceremonies and disturbing the peace. Each potential charge carried different penalties, and the combination could result in significant fines or even imprisonment. As evening approached, the story was dominating social media platforms worldwide. The hashtag Buckingham prank had been shared millions of times, with reactions ranging from amusement to outrage. Some users defended Marcus as a harmless prankster, while others viewed his actions as disrespectful to British traditions and military service. The royal family had not yet issued any official statement about the incident, though palace sources indicated they were monitoring the situation closely. Any comment from the monarchy would carry enormous weight and could significantly influence both public opinion and legal proceedings. Marcus's friends and former classmates were being contacted by journalists seeking insights into his character and past behavior. Most refused to comment publicly, but the pressure was building as media outlets competed for exclusive angles on the developing story. The incident had also sparked broader discussions about celebrity privilege, mental health awareness, and the pressures faced by children of famous parents. Social commentators were using Marcus's case to examine larger societal issues, transforming what began as a simple prank into a catalyst for national conversation. As Sir Richard Wellington's car pulled up outside Belgravia police station, photographers and news crews surged forward hoping to capture his reaction. The actor's face was stoic as he walked through the crowd, refusing to answer shouted questions about his son's condition or his own feelings about the incident. The reunion between father and son took place in a small, windowless room at Belgravia police station, away from the media circus that had gathered outside. Sir Richard Wellington entered the room with the controlled composure he had perfected through decades of stage and screen performances, but his carefully maintained facade cracked the moment he saw Marcus sitting hunched over at the metal table, looking younger and more vulnerable than his 23 years. "Dad, I'm so sorry," Marcus said, the words tumbling out before his father could speak. Tears that he had been holding back for hours finally spilled over as the full weight of his actions hit him. "I've ruined everything, haven't I? Your reputation, our family name, everything you've worked for your entire career." Sir Richard crossed the room in 2 quick strides and wrapped his son in a fierce embrace. Despite his disappointment and concern about the legal implications, his parental instincts overrode everything else. "We'll get through this together," he said quietly, his voice steady but emotional. "Whatever happens, you're my son, and we'll face this as a family." Eleanor Blackwood had arrived shortly before Sir Richard and was already reviewing the preliminary charges with Detective Patterson. The barrister's reputation for handling high-profile cases with discretion and skill had made her the Wellington family's first choice for legal representation. She understood that this case would require both legal expertise and careful public relations management. "The Crown Prosecution Service is considering several charges," Eleanor explained to the Wellingtons during their brief consultation. "The most serious is assault on a police officer, which could carry a prison sentence. There's also interference with official duties and disturbing the peace. However, given Marcus's clean record and the non-violent nature of the incident, we have grounds for a strong defense." The legal strategy would focus on Marcus's character, his lack of criminal history, and the impulsive rather than premeditated nature of his actions. Eleanor had already begun gathering character references from Marcus's former teachers, employers, and family friends. The goal was to present him as a young man who had made a serious error in judgment rather than someone with malicious intent. Meanwhile, the media storm was intensifying beyond anything the Wellington family had experienced before. Outside the police station, news vans from major networks had set up a temporary broadcast center, with reporters providing live updates every few minutes. The story had captured public imagination in a way that surprised even seasoned media professionals. Social media analysis showed that public opinion was deeply divided. Younger users tended to sympathize with Marcus, viewing his action as a harmless prank that had been blown out of proportion by an overly serious establishment. Older demographics were more likely to see his behavior as disrespectful to important British traditions and military service. The generational divide in reactions was becoming a story in itself. Rebecca Chun had made her decision about the video footage after consulting with her family back in Hong Kong. Rather than selling exclusive rights to a single news organization, she chose to donate the proceeds from licensing her video to a charity that supported military veterans. Her decision earned widespread praise and helped shift some media focus toward the positive aspects of the story. "I never intended for my vacation video to become part of someone else's problems," Rebecca explained to a reporter via video call from her London hotel. "Marcus made a mistake, but he doesn't deserve to have his life destroyed over it. If there's going to be money made from this situation, at least some good should come from it." The charitable donation also served to humanize the story and remind the public that real people were involved rather than just celebrities and abstract institutions. Rebecca's gesture sparked a broader conversation about compassion and second chances, which would prove helpful to Marcus's case in the court of public opinion. At Buckingham Palace, the security review was revealing both strengths and weaknesses in current protocols. Commander Williams's team had identified several areas for improvement, including enhanced crowd monitoring procedures and revised positioning guidelines for ceremonial events. The incident, while embarrassing, was serving as a valuable learning experience for Royal Protection Services. Guard Captain Morrison had become something of a reluctant celebrity himself, with his professional handling of the situation earning praise from military officials and the general public. However, he remained focused on his duties and declined all media interview requests, demonstrating the kind of dedication to service that had made him an ideal candidate for Royal Guard duty. The Guard's perspective on the incident was complex. While they understood that Marcus had meant no real harm, they also felt that his actions trivialized their service and the traditions they represented. Many were military veterans who had served in combat zones before being selected for ceremonial duties, and they viewed their roles as serious responsibilities rather than tourist attractions. Sir Richard's publicist, Margaret Thornby, was working around the clock to manage the crisis from a public relations standpoint. Her strategy involved controlled access to the family, carefully crafted statements that expressed remorse without admitting legal guilt, and an emphasis on Marcus's youth and the pressures of growing up in the spotlight. The Wellington family is deeply sorry for any disruption caused to the important ceremonial duties at Buckingham Palace. Margaret's carefully worded statement read, Marcus is a young man who made an impulsive decision that he deeply regrets. The family has the utmost respect for British traditions and the dedicated service members who maintain them. The statement was designed to acknowledge wrongdoing without providing ammunition for prosecutors, while also demonstrating respect for the institutions that Marcus had inadvertently offended. Every word had been carefully chosen to balance legal considerations with public relations needs. Legal experts following the case were offering varied predictions about likely outcomes. Some believed that Marcus's celebrity status and clean record would result in relatively light punishment, possibly community service and a fine. Others argued that making an example of him might be necessary to deter others from similar actions during royal ceremonies. Former Metropolitan Police Commander David Harrison provided analysis for BBC News, explaining the serious nature of security protocols around royal events. Any interference with ceremonial duties is treated as a potential security threat, he said. While this appears to be a harmless prank, the procedures must be followed regardless of intent. The security forces can't make assumptions about motives in the moment. The international media attention was putting pressure on British authorities to handle the case in a way that reflected well on the country's justice system. Too harsh a punishment might seem vindictive, while too lenient a response could suggest that celebrity status provided immunity from consequences. Finding the right balance would be crucial. Marcus's friends from university had organized an informal support network, using social media to share positive memories and character testimonials. Their efforts revealed a different side of the young man than what had been portrayed in some media coverage. Someone who was caring, funny, and genuinely troubled by living in his father's shadow rather than malicious or entitled. Marcus has always been generous with his time and supportive of his friends, posted Sarah Jenkins, his former flatmate at university. He struggles with anxiety about public attention, which makes this whole situation even more difficult for him. He's not the privileged troublemaker some people are making him out to be. The Crown Prosecution Service was carefully considering how to proceed with the case. The clear video evidence made prosecution straightforward from a legal standpoint, but the high-profile nature of the defendant and the relatively minor nature of the actual harm caused complicated the decision-making process. Senior prosecutor Amanda Clark was assigned to review the case and make recommendations about charges. Her analysis would need to consider not just the legal merits, but also the public interest in prosecution and the likelihood of achieving justice through court proceedings versus alternative methods of resolution. As the day progressed, more details emerged about Marcus's background and the pressures that may have contributed to his impulsive decision. Mental health advocates began calling for compassion and understanding, pointing out that children of celebrities often struggled with identity issues and public expectations that could lead to poor decision-making. Dr. Jennifer Morrison, a psychologist specializing in celebrity families, provided insight to the media about the unique challenges faced by children of famous parents. They grow up in an environment where their every action is scrutinized and judged, she explained. The pressure to establish their own identity while living in a parent's shadow can lead to impulsive behaviors as they seek attention and validation. This psychological perspective added another layer to the public discussion about Marcus's actions. Rather than simply viewing him as a privileged young man acting out, some began to see him as someone struggling with very real psychological pressures that could affect anyone in his position. The royal family's continued silence on the matter was becoming a story in itself. Palace insiders suggested that they were waiting to see how the legal process unfolded before making any official comments. But their restraint was being interpreted by some as dignified and, by others, as aloof. As evening approached on what had become one of the most eventful days in recent royal ceremonial history, all parties involved were preparing for what would likely be a long legal process. The initial shock of the incident was giving way to the complex realities of navigating justice, media attention, and public opinion in a high-profile case that had captured international attention. 6 months after the incident at Buckingham Palace, Marcus Wellington stood in the dock at Westminster Magistrates' Court, facing the consequences of his impulsive decision. The courtroom was packed with media representatives, legal observers, and members of the public who had followed the case through its various twists and turns. The young man who had once sought attention through a foolish prank now found himself with more scrutiny than he had ever wanted. The legal proceedings had been complex and drawn out, involving multiple hearings, plea negotiations, and extensive character assessments. Eleanor Blackwood had worked tirelessly to present Marcus in the most favorable light possible, while the Crown Prosecution Service had pursued charges that reflected the seriousness of interfering with royal ceremonial duties while acknowledging the non-violent nature of the offense. Magistrate Helen Davies, known for her fair but firm approach to high-profile cases, reviewed the extensive documentation that had been compiled over the months since Marcus's arrest. Character references from teachers, employers, and family friends painted a picture of a young man struggling with identity and purpose rather than someone with malicious intent or disrespect for British institutions. "Mr. Wellington," Magistrate Davies began, her voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench, "you have pleaded guilty to charges of assault on a police officer and interference with official duties. While I accept that your actions were impulsive rather than premeditated, they caused significant disruption to an important ceremonial event and required a substantial security response." The months since the incident had been transformative for Marcus in ways he never could have anticipated. The intense media scrutiny and legal process had forced him to confront the deeper issues that had led to his poor decision-making. With the help of a therapist specializing in celebrity family dynamics, he had begun to understand the anxiety and identity confusion that had driven his need for attention. Sir Richard Wellington sat in the public gallery, his face showing the strain of watching his son face legal consequences for a mistake that had dominated their family life for half a year. The actor's career had inevitably suffered from the scandal, with several projects delayed or canceled as producers worried about negative publicity. However, the experience had also brought father and son closer together as they navigated the crisis as a united family. "I want to address the court directly about my actions," Marcus said when given the opportunity to speak before sentencing. His voice was steadier than it had been during his initial arrest, reflecting months of personal growth and reflection. "What I did was stupid and disrespectful, and I understand now how my actions affected not just the guards doing their duty, but everyone who values the traditions they represent." The victim impact statements had been particularly powerful in helping Marcus understand the consequences of his actions. Guard Captain Morrison had written about how the incident had affected not just him personally, but the entire unit's sense of security during ceremonial duties. The Guard's professional dignity and measured response had earned widespread respect and highlighted the seriousness of interfering with military personnel. "We trained for years to maintain our composure and discipline during these ceremonies," Morrison had written. "When someone treats our service as entertainment or a joke, it undermines the respect we've earned through our dedication and service to the country. However, I believe Mr. Wellington's genuine remorse suggests he has learned from this experience." Rebecca Chun had also provided a statement to the court, describing her perspective as the person who had inadvertently documented the incident. Her decision to donate video licensing proceeds to military charities had been noted by the court as evidence of the positive outcomes that could emerge from negative situations when people chose to act with compassion and responsibility. The psychological assessment ordered by the court had revealed the complex factors that had contributed to Marcus's decision-making. Dr. Sarah Fletcher, who had conducted extensive interviews with Marcus and his family, described a young man struggling with anxiety, perfectionism, and the overwhelming pressure of living up to his father's reputation. Mr. Wellington exhibits classic symptoms of what we might call celebrity child syndrome, Dr. Fletcher explained in her report. The constant public attention, combined with very high expectations and limited privacy, can create psychological pressure that manifests in attention-seeking behaviors. His actions, while inexcusable, were symptomatic of deeper emotional struggles rather than malicious intent. The court had also heard from experts on royal security protocols, who explained how the incident had led to meaningful improvements in crowd management and threat assessment procedures. Commander Williams had testified that while the security breach was serious, the quick response had demonstrated the effectiveness of existing protocols while revealing areas for enhancement. Mr. Wellington's actions, while regrettable, served as a valuable learning experience for Royal Protection Services, Commander Williams had explained. We have implemented new crowd monitoring procedures and enhanced coordination protocols that make similar incidents less likely in the future. The broader public response to the case had evolved significantly over the months since the initial incident. What had begun as a media sensation had gradually transformed into a more nuanced discussion about mental health, celebrity culture, and the importance of allowing young people to learn from their mistakes without being destroyed by them. Mental health advocates had rallied around Marcus's case, using it to highlight the particular pressures faced by children of celebrities and the importance of providing support rather than simply punishment for young people struggling with identity and anxiety issues. Their advocacy had contributed to a shift in public opinion toward a more sympathetic understanding of Marcus's situation. The military community's response had been mixed but generally measured. While many service members had initially felt offended by Marcus's actions, Guard Captain Morrison's dignified handling of the situation and the subsequent security improvements had helped transform the incident into a positive outcome for Royal Protection Services. Eleanor Blackwood's defense strategy had emphasized Marcus's youth, his clean record, his genuine remorse, and the positive changes he had made in his life since the incident. She had also highlighted the charitable work he had begun, including volunteering with organizations that supported military veterans and young people struggling with mental health issues. Your Honor, Eleanor had argued during closing statements, Mr. Wellington's actions were wrong, and he accepts full responsibility for them. However, he has demonstrated through his subsequent behavior that he is capable of learning from this mistake and contributing positively to society. A sentence that acknowledges his wrongdoing while allowing him to continue his rehabilitation would serve justice while recognizing his potential for positive change. The prosecution had acknowledged Marcus's remorse and positive changes while maintaining that serious consequences were necessary to demonstrate that royal ceremonial duties could not be interfered with regardless of intent or celebrity status. They had requested a sentence that would serve as a deterrent while being proportionate to the actual harm caused. Magistrate Davies had carefully considered all the evidence, statements, and arguments before reaching her decision. The sentence would need to balance multiple factors, acknowledging the seriousness of the offense, reflecting Marcus's genuine remorse and positive changes, serving as a deterrent to others, and maintaining public confidence in the justice system's handling of high-profile cases. Mr. Wellington, she announced, I sentence you to 200 hours of community service to be completed with organizations supporting military veterans and young people with mental health challenges. You will also pay a fine of £5,000 and court costs. This sentence reflects both the seriousness of your actions and your demonstrated commitment to making positive changes in your life. The sentence was received with general approval from observers who felt it struck the right balance between accountability and compassion. Marcus would serve his community service working with organizations that connected directly to the people affected by his actions, while the fine demonstrated that there were real consequences for interfering with important ceremonial duties. Outside the courthouse, Sir Richard Wellington spoke briefly to the gathered media for the first time since the incident. My son made a serious mistake, and he is paying the consequences for his actions, he said. However, this experience has taught our entire family valuable lessons about responsibility, respect, and the importance of thinking before acting. We are grateful for the court's fair consideration of all the circumstances. Marcus himself had grown significantly during the legal process. The young man who had impulsively reached for a guard's hat seeking attention had evolved into someone who understood the weight of his actions and their effects on others. His community service would provide ongoing opportunities to contribute positively to society while continuing his personal growth. Rebecca Chun, who had returned to Hong Kong but continued to follow the case, expressed satisfaction with the outcome. Her decision to donate video proceeds to military charities had raised over £50,000, turning the incident into a positive force for supporting veterans. Her example had inspired others to find constructive responses to viral moments rather than simply exploiting them for profit. The incident had ultimately served as a catalyst for positive changes in multiple areas. Royal security protocols had been improved, public discussion about mental health and celebrity pressure had been enhanced, and charitable support for veterans had increased. While Marcus's original intent had been misguided, the long-term outcomes demonstrated how negative incidents could be transformed into opportunities for growth and positive change. Guard Captain Morrison continued his distinguished service with the Royal Guards, his professional handling of the incident earning commendation from his superiors and respect from his colleagues. The experience had reinforced his understanding of the importance of maintaining dignity and professionalism even in unusual circumstances. As Marcus left the courthouse to begin his community service, he carried with him hard-won wisdom about the consequences of impulsive actions and the importance of channeling the desire for attention into positive contributions to society. The hat that had seemed like such an innocent target for his prank had become a symbol of respect, tradition, and the serious responsibilities that come with living in the public eye.